2:15 in the morning. The destroyer DDG-64 USS Carney was cutting through the heavy swells of the North Arabian Sea. A single low-flying radar contact was closing on the bridge at 200 kilometers per hour, and the automated defense systems had not yet been cleared to fire. The humid air carried the faint scent of diesel and salt, clinging to the steel hull as the ship moved in silence under a moonless sky. Inside the bridge, the only light came from the soft glow of the tactical consoles and the rhythmic sweeping of the radar displays. The commanding officer stood near the forward windows, his eyes fixed on the black horizon. Beside him, the officer of the deck and 5 bridge watchstanders were coordinating a routine course adjustment toward the Strait of Hormuz. It was a scene of practiced, professional calm that had defined the last 6 months of the deployment. That calm was shattered in a single heart-stopping second when the bridge wing lookout screamed a warning over the internal circuit. The Iranian-made one-way attack drone, carrying a 40-kilogram high-explosive warhead, slammed directly into the port side of the bridge structure. The impact was not a distant sound. It was a physical reconstruction of the world. The composite airframe of the drone shredded upon contact with the reinforced glass and steel, but the kinetic energy alone was enough to buckle the forward bulkhead. A millisecond later, the primary charge detonated. A fireball bleached the darkness of blow, the bridge, expanding with a violent, overpressured roar that shattered every window into thousands of jagged crystalline fragments. The heat blast, reaching temperatures of over 2,000 degrees, washed across the command chairs and the navigation consoles, melting plastic and searing skin instantly. The sound was a flat, ear-cracking boom that registered more as a punch to the chest than a noise. The commanding officer, standing directly in the path of the primary blast wave, was killed instantly by a combination of thermal, trauma, and high-velocity shrapnel. Beside him, the officer of the deck and 4 other sailors were thrown backward across the deck plates, their bodies broken by the force of the explosion. The interior of the bridge, once a hub of precise maritime control, was transformed into a blackened cavern of twisted metal, screaming alarms, and thick, acrid chemical smoke. Beneath the deck, the rest of the ship felt the strike as a massive, shuddering vibration that seemed to lift the 9,000-ton vessel out of the water. In the Combat Information Center, 2 decks down, the Tactical Action Officer felt his headset vibrate against his ears as the primary bridge circuits went dead. On his screen, the status indicator for the bridge turned a flashing, ominous red. "Bridge is down," the Tactical Action Officer shouted, his voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through his system. "All stations, this is the Combat Information Center. We have a direct hit on the bridge. Shift control to the secondary station." Now, on the bridge, the scene was one of absolute devastation. The 6th casualty, a young quartermaster who had been standing near the 6th aft exit, lay among the ruins of the chart table. The smoke was so thick it blotted out the emergency lighting, leaving the survivors to crawl through the darkness by the flickering light of burning electrical fires. The smell was a sickening mixture of burnt copper, jet fuel, and the scorched insulation of 1,000 severed wires. Damage control teams, already running toward the sound of the blast, found the heavy steel doors to the bridge warped and jammed in their frames. They worked with hydraulic spreaders, the metal groaning and shrieking as they forced their way into the inferno. Inside, they found a wasteland. The steering gear was unresponsive. The throttles were frozen. The commanding officer and his bridge team were gone, leaving the USS Carney blind and drifting in contested waters. Outside, the Arabian Sea remained indifferent, the waves continuing to slap against the scorched hull. But the silence of the night was over. Across the ship, the call for general quarters began to chime a rhythmic 2-tone alarm that signaled the transition from a ship at peace to a machine of war. The first blood had been drawn, and the crew of the Carney was now a leaderless unit fighting for the survival of their vessel. 2:21 in the morning, 6 minutes after the Iranian drone impact. The destroyer DDG-64 USS Carney, was trailing a thick plume of oily black smoke into the night sky as it began a slow, uncommanded turn to starboard. The primary steering cables had been severed when the bridge deck buckled, leaving the rudder locked at 10 degrees. In the darkness of the lower decks, the ship's internal communications were a chaotic symphony of alarm bells and the rhythmic thudding of heavy boots on steel ladders. The damage control parties, organized into Repair Locker 2 and Repair Locker 5, moved through the passageways with practiced mechanical efficiency. Each sailor was encased in a heavy, fire-resistant suit, their faces hidden behind the glass of breathing apparatus masks. They carried lengths of heavy fire hose and thermal imaging cameras, moving toward the heat source that was currently melting the aluminum bulkheads of the upper superstructure. The air inside the ship was no longer the recycled, cool oxygen of an hour ago. It was a choking mixture of burnt wiring and the chemical bite of firefighting foam. At the entrance to the bridge, the lead damage controlman signaled for the fire main to be opened. A high-pressure stream of water and aqueous film-forming foam erupted from the nozzle, slamming into the wall of flame that blocked the passage. The sound was a deafening hiss as the liquid hit the white-hot metal of the navigation consoles. Clouds of steam, thick enough to blot out the powerful flashlights of the repair team, filled the space instantly, raising the humidity to a level that felt like liquid fire against any exposed skin. "Check for survivors," the repair locker leader shouted through his mask, his voice distorted by the radio. "Cool the bulkheads on the deck below. We cannot let this fire reach the vertical launch system." While the fire raged above, the mechanical heart of the ship was still beating. In the central control station, located deep within the hull, the engineering watchstanders were fighting their own battle. They watched as the temperature sensors for the forward engine room climbed toward dangerous levels. The impact had caused a secondary rupture in a low-pressure steam line, and the compartment was rapidly filling with superheated vapor. Two sailors, working in total darkness, used heavy manual wrenches to isolate the leak, their hands shaking as the hull groaned under the stress of the fire. The executive officer, now the highest-ranking officer on the ship, arrived in the Combat Information Center exactly 7 minutes after the strike. He was pale, but his movements were deliberate. He stepped over a bundle of severed fiber optic cables and took his seat. At the center of the dark, blue-lit room, the tactical action officer looked at him, his face illuminated by the flickering light of a damaged monitor. "Executive officer is on the deck," the tactical action officer announced. "Command is transferred to the Combat Information Center. We're in manual steering from the aft station. Engines are at 1/3 ahead." The executive officer nodded once, his eyes scanning the primary tactical display. "Report on the bridge," he commanded. "The bridge is non-operational." "Sir?" The tactical action officer replied, his voice tight. "Casualties are confirmed. The commanding officer is down. We have 7 personnel unaccounted for, assumed killed in the initial blast. The fire is contained to the bridge and the signal bridge, but the structural integrity of the mast is compromised." Outside, the ship continued its slow, wounded crawl through the water. The sea was still running 2-meter swells, and the Carney rolled heavily to the port side, the weight of the water being pumped onto the bridge, creating a dangerous list. On the deck below, the fire medical teams had established a secondary triage station in the mess decks. They worked under the harsh glare of emergency lanterns, treating the 3 survivors who had been pulled from the periphery of the blast. The smell of antiseptic clashed with the stench of smoke that had permeated every corner of the vessel. Despite the loss of its leadership and the fire eating at its upper decks, the USS Carney was not a dead ship. It was a wounded predator. In the Combat Information Center, the radar operators were already bringing the AN/SPY-1D radar back to full power. They were not just looking for more drones, they were searching for the source. The disciplined training of the military forces was taking over, suppressing the shock, and the grief of the crew in favor of the cold, systematic requirements of survival and retaliation. The executive officer leaned forward, his hand gripping the edge of the command console. "I want a full tactical picture of the foreign military coast," he said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous growl. "And I want the Mark 41 launch system ready for a full-cell engagement within the next 10 minutes. We are not just defending this ship anymore. We are finishing this." 2:30 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the destroyer DDG-64 USS Carney. Inside the windowless command hub, the air was a pressurized mixture of ozone, recycled oxygen, and the faint, persistent stink of electrical smoke that had drifted down from the shattered bridge. The executive officer sat in the command chair, his face illuminated by the cold, blue and amber glow of the Aegis combat system displays. Around him, 30 sailors worked in a silence so absolute it was punctuated only by the rhythmic clicking of trackballs and the low, urgent murmurs of tactical reports. The transition of command had been immediate, dictated by the brutal reality of the drone strike. With the commanding officer and the primary bridge team confirmed killed in action, the executive officer was now the sole authority over 9,000 tons of advanced weaponry and 300 shocked crew members. He looked at the status board. The list of names under the heading of deceased was 7 long, with another 14 personnel listed as wounded or missing. It was a staggering loss for a single engagement, but the tactical situation allowed no time for mourning. "This is the executive officer," he said. His voice amplified across the ship through the 1MC internal broadcast system. "The commanding officer is down. I have assumed command of USS Carney. We have suffered a severe strike to the bridge, but this ship is still a warship, and we are still in the fight. Damage control teams are containing the fires. Engineering has the engines. Now, we are going to find who did this, and we are going to ensure they never do it again. General quarters remains in effect. That is all." He replaced the handset and turned his attention to the tactical action officer. The center of the room was dominated by the large screen display, showing a 300-mile radius around the ship. The AN/SPY-1 radar was now operating at maximum power, its electronic beams sweeping the surface of the water and the skies above the foreign military coast. The ship was currently located at coordinates 24 degrees north, 58 degrees east, placing them within range of land-based anti-ship cruise missiles. "Status of the Regional Command Fleet connection," the executive officer commanded. "We have a solid tactical data link track with Regional Command Center, sir," the tactical action officer replied, adjusting his headset. "Satellite communications are stable. We are transmitting the drone's flight telemetry and the impact data now. Intelligence is already running the signature against the database." A high-pitched chirp echoed through the compartment as a new contact appeared on the screen. It was a flashing red diamond, designated as a potential hostile. The digital tag identified it as a foreign military mobile launcher located near the coastal hills. The naval warship's bridge had likely been launched from that specific coordinate. The executive officer watched as the track stabilized, the advanced weapons system calculating the exact distance, 142 kilometers. "Direct the Mark 41 vertical launch system to warm up cells 1 through 12, the executive officer ordered. "I want the Tomahawk cruise missiles initialized and ready for mission data upload. We are not waiting for a second strike." The sailors in the Combat Information Center moved with a renewed, grim focus. The shock of the last 20 minutes was being replaced by the cold, mechanical process of targeting. On the weapons consoles, keys were turned and safety interlocks were bypassed. The ship's computers began talking to the missiles housed in the armored cells on the forward deck, feeding them GPS coordinates, terrain contour matching data, and the high-resolution imagery of the foreign military launch site. The executive officer leaned back slightly, feeling the subtle vibration of the ship through the deck plates. The engineering team had managed to stabilize the list, and the naval warship was now moving at 20 knots, heading further out into the open water of the Arabian Sea to increase their defensive reaction time. The smell of the sea air, usually so prevalent on the bridge, was absent here. In the Combat Information Center, the world was reduced to pixels, data streams, and the weight of the decisions that would be made in the next 10 minutes. Fifth Fleet, sir, the communications officer announced. Vice Admiral is on the secure line. He is asking for a readiness report and the status of our retaliatory options. The executive officer took the secure handset. He looked around his room, at the young men and women who had just lost their captain and their friends. Their eyes were fixed on their screens, their hands steady on their controls. They were waiting for him to lead. This is the naval warship, the executive officer said into the line. We are wounded, but we are operational. We have a confirmed lock on the origin point. We are standing by for the order to engage. 2:45 in the morning. The Combat Information Center of the destroyer DDG-64 USS Carney. The tactical action officer adjusted the gain on his console as the ship's electronic support measures suite began to flood with high-priority data. The ship's automated systems were now cross-referencing the drone's final flight path with satellite imagery provided by the Indo-Pacific Command's overhead assets. The air in the room remained thick, but the cooling systems were finally winning the battle against the rising heat of the electronics. Analysis is complete, sir, the tactical action officer said, his voice cutting through the hum of the cooling fans. The drone was a Shahed 136 variant, launched from a mobile truck-mounted rail. We have backtracked the signal to a site 3 kilometers inland from the port of Jask. The executive officer stood up and walked to the primary tactical display. A high-resolution satellite overlay replaced the abstract radar icons. It showed a desolate stretch of coastal scrubland dominated by a single concrete pad and a cluster of 3 heavy trucks. Infrared sensors from a passing drone showed heat signatures radiating from the truck. Engines, they were still warm, the launch having occurred less than 40 minutes ago. The signature matches the drone that struck our bridge, the intelligence officer added, pointing to a series of telemetry graphs. It was not a random launch. They used a low-profile, terrain-hugging flight path to exploit our radar shadows. They knew exactly where the bridge would be relative to our course. The coordinates were displayed in white text against the black screen. 25 degrees, 38 minutes north. 57 degrees, 46 minutes east. This was not a localized insurgent operation. The precision of the strike and the sophistication of the drone's guidance system pointed directly to a state-level coordinated attack. The Iranian Coastal Defense Network had intentionally targeted a United States destroyer in international waters. The executive officer looked at the numbers. The cost of that strike was written in the blood of his commanding officer and 6 of his sailors. But as a professional, he focused on the geometry of the battlefield. The Iranian site was defended by an HQ-9 surface-to-air missile battery, providing a lethal umbrella over the launch vehicles. Any retaliatory strike would have to be fast, low-flying, and powerful enough to saturate the enemy's defenses before they could react. Tactical Action Officer. What is the status of the Mark 41 vertical launch system? The executive officer asked. 12 cells are initialized with Tomahawk Land Attack Missiles, Block 5, the officer replied. Targeting data has been uploaded, missiles onboard computers. We are synchronized with the Global Positioning System and the Terrain Contour Matching Database. Time to launch is less than 90 seconds from your command. The executive officer knew that the moment he gave that order, the conflict would escalate. From a localized incident to a regional engagement, the USS Carney was currently operating as a lone unit, 30 miles from the nearest support vessel. To the north, Iranian fast attack craft were already being detected, leaving their peers at Bandar Abbas, likely moving to capitalize on the Carney's perceived weakness. The ship's 5-inch gun and its 2 close-in weapon systems were the only thing standing between the crew and a secondary surface assault. Confirming target coordinates, 25 degrees 38 minutes north, 57 degrees 46 minutes east, the executive officer said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Validate the mission profile. We are going for a simultaneous arrival on target. I want all 12 missiles to hit within a 5-second window. The weapons control officer tapped a series of commands into his keyboard. Mission profile validated. Missiles will execute a high subsonic, sea-skimming approach before pop-up maneuvers at the target site. Estimated time of flight, 9 minutes and 40 seconds. The environment around the ship remained a pitch-black expanse of water, the only light being the flickering orange glow from the bridge fire that the damage control teams were still fighting to extinguish. The smell of burning rubber and hot salt spray drifted through the ventilation, a constant reminder of the stakes. The ship rolled gently in the sea. Swell, the heavy steel of its hull absorbing the energy of the sea. Message from Central Command. The communications officer announced, "Authorization for proportional response is granted. Use of deadly force is authorized against the Jask launch facility and any hostile forces interfering with the egress of USS Carney." The executive officer looked at his watch. 2:50 in the morning. He looked at the empty seat where his captain should have been. He felt the weight of the 300 lives on board and the responsibility to the 7 who were already gone. "Very well," the executive officer said. "Finalize the launch sequence. We strike in 60 seconds." 2:51 in the morning. The forward deck of the destroyer DDG-64 USS Carney. The air was heavy with the smell of burnt electrical insulation and the sharp, clean bite of the sea. But the primary focus of the entire ship had shifted to the 64 armored hatches of the Mark 41 vertical launch system. Below the steel deck, 12 Tomahawk Land Attack Missiles sat in their canisters, their guidance systems locked onto the coordinates of the Iranian launch site at Jask. "All stations. This is the Combat Information Center." The executive officer's voice crackled over the ship-wide circuit. "Batteries released. Execute the strike." Inside the weapons control station, the operator pressed the sequence initiate button. There was a split second of electronic silence, then the first armored hatch on the forward deck blew open with a violent metallic clang. A thick column of white smoke and orange flame erupted from the cell, punching straight up into the night sky with a sound like a freight train screaming through a tunnel. The physical shock of the launch traveled through the hull, a deep, rhythmic thud that the crew felt in their teeth. The first Tomahawk surged out of the cell, its solid fuel booster casting a brilliant, blinding white light across the scorched remains of the Carney's bridge. The missile cleared the mast by 30 meters, its wings flicking out with a mechanical snap before the turbofan engine ignited. A second missile followed 3 seconds later, then a third, and a fourth. The night was no longer dark. The air around the Carney was a churning vortex of white smoke and the searing, chemical heat of solid rocket propellant. 12 missiles climbed into the sky in a staggered vertical line, their exhaust trails creating a jagged fence of white light against the black horizon. Once they reached their transition altitude, they pitched over in unison, diving back toward the surface of the water to begin their low-altitude, sea-skimming transit toward the Iranian coast. Receding whistle as the missiles disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the smell of burnt sulfur and the settling dust of the launch. Cells on the deck. "All birds are away and climbing," the weapons control officer reported, his eyes fixed on the telemetry data. "Transitions are clean. Guidance is active. Time to target is 9 minutes." In the Combat Information Center, the crew watched the 12 green icons move steadily across the blue screen, tracking toward the red diamond that represented the Jask launch facility. The ship was now operating under a dark profile, with all non-essential lights extinguished to minimize its visual signature. The fires on the bridge were finally under control, leaving the upper structure a jagged, blackened ruin that smelled of wet ash and scorched steel. The executive officer sat back in his chair, his hands gripped tight on the armrests. He wasn't looking at the screen anymore. He was looking at the faces of his sailors. They had executed a perfect launch while their ship was still smoking from a direct hit. The discipline of the unit had held, but the tension in the room was palpable. They knew that the moment those missiles hit the Iranian soil, the rules of this engagement would change again. "Keep the radar focused on the surface," the executive officer commanded. "If they have fast boats in the area, they'll be moving now." I want the 5-inch gun manned and ready. We are not getting caught a second time." Outside, the Arabian Sea was a black void, the waves illuminated only by the faint, receding glow of the 12 Tomahawk engines. The Carney continued its steady move away from the coast, its engines humming at 25 knots. The air was cold, but the deck plates above the launch cells were still radiating a dull, pulsating heat. The strike was in motion, a line of fire reaching out across the water to settle the debt for the men lost on the bridge. 3 in the morning, the Iranian coast near Jask. The 12 Tomahawk cruise missiles, flying at 880 kilometers per hour, dropped to just 10 meters above the wavetops as they crossed the shoreline. The air over the Iranian launch site was still and humid, carrying the scent of dry earth and the exhaust of idling heavy trucks. The Iranian crews were in the process of reloading a second drone onto the launch rail when the first missile arrived. The trigger was squeezed by a computer 300 miles away, and the first warhead punched straight through the center of the mobile command vehicle. The 450-kilogram high-explosive charge detonated instantly, the blast wave expanding at 7,000 meters per second. The vehicle did not just explode, it disintegrated. The steel frame was shredded into thousands of jagged slivers that were sent flying through the surrounding scrubland, cutting down everything in a 50-meter radius. The heat of the detonation, reaching 3,000 degrees, vaporized the fuel in the nearby trucks, creating a secondary fireball that bleached the sky white for 3 full seconds. 2 seconds later, 3 more missiles slammed into the concrete, launch pad, and the remaining drone transport trucks. 1 warhead drove into the base of the HQ-9 radar unit. The detonation, snapping the heavy base, lattice-massed like a dry twig. The turret of the launcher was blasted off its chassis, rising 10 meters into the air before falling back and crushing the generator unit below. A massive fireball erupted as the solid rocket fuel of the unlaunched Iranian missiles ignited, sending streaks of white-hot, magnesium light into the darkness. The sound was a series of overlapping, ear-cracking detonations that cracked the windshields of vehicles parked over a kilometer away. The defending Iranian personnel who survived the initial blast reacted in total panic, breaking formation and running toward the nearby hills as the final 8 missiles arrived in a coordinated swarm. The missiles executed a pop-up maneuver, diving vertically into the remaining infrastructure. The ground shuddered with the force of the impacts, the pressure wave compressing the chests of anyone within 300 meters. The entire launch facility was transformed into a wasteland of burning tires, twisted aluminum, and the acrid stink of chemical propellant. Black smoke boiled out of the craters, rising 500 meters into the windless night. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the crackling of burning electrical components and the hiss of escaping steam from ruptured cooling lines. The Iranian launch site at Jask had been obliterated. The 12 missiles had achieved total saturation, leaving nothing behind but glowing wreckage and the settling dust of the concrete pad. 3:15 in the morning. The North Arabian Sea. The destroyer DDG-64 USS Carney was moving at 28 knots, its bow cutting through the dark water and throwing a high, white spray into the night air. In the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere had shifted from the clinical focus of the missile strike to the high-intensity vigilance of surface defense. The AN/SPY-1 radar was tracking multiple high-speed contacts emerging from the Iranian territorial waters to the north. New surface tracks, designated hostile, the surface warfare officer announced, his fingers flying across the touch-sensitive console. 5 Iranian fast attack craft, Bog Hamar class, closing at 45 knots, bearing 010, range 22 kilometers, and closing. The executive officer leaned forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied the interlocking radar rings. The Iranian boats were small, maneuverable, and equipped with a combination of heavy machine guns and short-range anti-ship missiles. In the hands of a disciplined crew, they were a nuisance. In the hands of a crew seeking martyrdom for the destruction of their launch site, they were a lethal swarm. The Carney, With its bridge destroyed and its primary steering, operated from an aft compartment, was less agile than usual, making it a vulnerable target for a multi-axis attack. "Identify the lead boat," the executive officer commanded, "and get the 5-inch gun on target. I want the close-in weapon system set to automatic engagement for any incoming missiles." Outside, the ship was a ghost in the water, running without navigation lights. The only illumination came from the faint glow of the sea's bioluminescence and the occasional spark from the blackened bridge where damaged control teams were still securing loose wiring. The smell of the ocean was sharp and cold, a stark contrast to the lingering heat of the Tomahawk launches. On the forward deck, the 5-inch Mark 45 gun turret whined as it rotated toward the north, its long barrel elevating with hydraulic precision. Range 15 kilometers, the surface warfare officer reported. "They are spreading out. 3 boats are moving to our port flank, 2 are heading for the stern. They are trying to bracket us." The executive officer knew the tactic. If the boats could get close enough, they could saturate the Carney's defenses with rocket-propelled grenades and small missiles, aiming for the sensitive radar arrays or the remaining command spaces. He could feel the vibration of the ship's 4 gas turbine engines through the deck, pushing the vessel to its structural limits as the engineers squeezed every ounce of power from the plant to maintain distance. "Warning shots?" the tactical action officer asked. "No," the executive officer replied, his voice cold. "They crossed that line an hour ago. When they reach 10 kilometers, open fire. I want the lead boat neutralized before they can launch." The logistics of the engagement were already in motion. Deep in the magazine, the automated hoist system was lifting 70-pound high-explosive shells to the gun mount. The crew in the aft steering compartment was struggling with the manual helm, their muscles straining against the resistance of the hydraulic fluid as they executed a zigzag pattern to throw off the enemy's aim. Every sailor on the ship was acutely aware that the Carney was fighting for its life with a shattered head and a makeshift brain. "Target lock confirmed on lead hostile. The gunners," mate reported. 5-inch gun is ready." The horizon to the north was a flat, black line. But on the infrared monitors, the fast boats appeared as brilliant white heat signatures, their wakes trailing behind them like glowing scars on the water. The gap was closing, at a combined speed of over 130 kilometers per hour. The air was electric with the anticipation of the coming collision. Range 10 kilometers. The surface warfare officer said. "Fire." The executive officer commanded. 3:20 in the morning, the North Arabian Sea. The 5-inch Mark 45 gun on the forward deck of USS Carney barked with a deafening, metallic crack that sent a shockwave rippling across the surface of the water. A meter-long tongue of orange flame punched into the darkness, followed by a dense cloud of gray smoke that was instantly whipped away by the wind of the ship's 30-knot transit. The 70-pound high-explosive shell crossed the 10-kilometer gap in seconds, guided by the precise calculations of the Aegis combat system. The round struck the lead Iranian Bagamar boat directly at the waterline. The impact was catastrophic. The shell's fuse triggered inside the fiberglass hull, and the resulting detonation blew the small vessel apart from the inside out. A fireball erupted, fueled by the boat's own fuel tanks and the crates of ammunition stored on deck. Pieces of the hull, some the size of car doors, were sent flying 60 meters into the air before crashing back into the churning wake. The boat disappeared from the radar screen instantly, replaced by a lingering heat, signature of burning debris. The remaining 4 Iranian craft did not retreat, they accelerated, their engines screaming as they bounced over the 2-meter swells. The 2 boats on the port flank launched a volley of 4 short-range anti-ship missiles. The missiles cleared their rails with a hiss of white smoke, dropping low to the water as they homed in on the Carney's massive radar signature. "Vampire, vampire!" The electronic warfare officer screamed. 4 missiles inbound. Bearing 330. The Carney's port-side close-in weapon system, a 20mm Phalanx Gatling gun swiveled toward the threat with a mechanical whine. It opened fire with a continuous, buzzing roar that sounded like a giant sheet of silk being torn in half. A stream of red tracer fire, at a rate of 75 rounds per second, reached out to meet the incoming threats. The first missile was struck 500 meters from the ship. Its warhead detonated in a spectacular white flash that showered the sea with burning magnesium. The second and third missiles were shredded a moment later, their airframes collapsing under the weight of the tungsten penetrators. The fourth missile, clipped by the edge of the tracer stream, tumbled wildly before slamming into the water 50 meters from the hull, sending a massive geyser of salt water over the side. The 5-inch gun fired again, the recoil rocking the 9,000-ton destroyer. The second shell bracketed the nearest boat on the starboard side, the near miss, creating a pressure wave that flipped the light craft onto its side. It stayed upright for 3 seconds, its propellers spinning uselessly in the air before the next shell hit it dead center. The boat erupted in a vertical pillar of fire and smoke that bleached the darkness white. The remaining 2 boats, realizing the Carney was far from helpless, broke their formation and executed a high-speed turn, their hulls vibrating as they fled back toward the Iranian coast. Black smoke rose from the 2 burning wreckage sites, the only markers left on the open sea. The sound of the Gatling gun faded, leaving only the high-pitched whine of the cooling fans and the heavy, rhythmic thumping of the Carney's engines. The deck plates were littered with thousands of spent brass casings, and the air carried the acrid, stinging smell of burnt, cordite, and vaporized salt. The surface threat had been neutralized in less than 4 minutes of focused, violent efficiency. 3:50 in the morning, the North Arabian Sea. The destroyer DDG-64 USS Carney had slowed to 15 knots to provide a stable deck for the incoming medical evacuation. The air was thick with the scent of salt water and the lingering, bitter odor of burnt explosives. Above the ship, the heavy thrumming of rotor blades cut through the dark as 2 MH-60 Sierra helicopters from the carrier USS Gerald R. Ford approached from the south. The logistics of moving critically wounded personnel from a damaged warship in the middle of a combat zone required absolute precision. On the Carney's flight deck, the landing signal enlisted sailor stood in the center of the tossing platform, holding 2 glowing amber wands to guide the first helicopter down. The deck was slick with sea spray and the remnants of firefighting foam, making every footstep a hazard. Helicopter 1 is on final approach, the air boss reported from the secondary control station. Clear the deck of all non-essential personnel. Triage teams, stand by. As the first helicopter touched down, its wheels locking into the deck grid, the side door slid open. Navy corpsmen and search and rescue swimmers jumped onto the deck, carrying specialized litters. They moved toward the internal passageway where the casualties had been stabilized. The transfer was a silent, grim procession. 11 wounded sailors, suffering from severe burns and shrapnel injuries, were carefully strapped into the helicopters. The movements were mechanical and swift, a testament to hundreds of hours of casualty evacuation drills. "Wait, we have the remains!" a corpsman shouted over the roar of the engines. The most somber part of the operation began. 6 transfer cases, draped in the national ensign, were carried onto the second helicopter. These were the sailors who had been on the bridge when the drone struck, including the commanding officer. The flight deck crew stood at attention, their heads bowed despite the stinging wind from the rotor wash. The smell of jet fuel from the helicopters mixed with the cold night air, creating a sensory memory that would stay with the survivors for the rest of their lives. "Helos are loaded and lifting," the air boss announced. "Clear for departure." The 2 helicopters rose into the air, their navigation lights blinking red and green, as they turned back toward the carrier strike group. As they disappeared into the distance, a new set of lights appeared on the horizon. The cruiser CG-73 USS Port Royal and 2 additional destroyers were closing fast at 35 knots. They had been dispatched by the regional command fleet to provide an escort and a defensive screen for the naval warship. The arrival of the reinforcements changed the tactical geometry of the area. The naval warship was no longer a lone, wounded target. It was now the center of a formidable surface action group. The naval cruiser pulled alongside, its powerful radar systems taking over the air defense picture for the entire formation. Through the darkness, the crews of the two ships could see each other, one pristine and glowing with light, the other blackened, scarred, and trailing a thin ribbon of smoke. Logistics teams on the naval warship began the process of damage assessment and temporary repair. Engineers worked to bypass the severed control lines on the bridge, running emergency fiber optic cables along the overheads of the main passageway. They used heavy industrial tape and welding torches to seal the smaller ruptures in the hull caused by shrapnel. In the galley, the mess specialists prepared hot coffee and sandwiches for the crew who had been at general quarters for over 2 hours. "We are stabilized," the executive officer reported to the strike group commander via the secure satellite link. "Engines are at 70%. We are maintaining our position within the screen, requesting replenishment of ammunition and firefighting supplies at first light." The naval warship, though battered and mourning its leaders, remained a functioning unit of the military forces. The logistics of mercy had ensured the wounded were cared for, and the arrival of the escort ensured the ship would survive to reach a friendly port. The night was beginning to fade into a gray, pre-dawn light, revealing the true extent of the damage to the mast and the bridge, but the ship continued to move forward, its flag flying defiantly in the wind. 6 in the morning. The North Arabian Sea. The first light of dawn revealed the true, jagged silhouette of the DDG-64 USS Carney. The bridge structure, once the pristine nerve center of the vessel, was a blackened, hollowed-out skeleton of twisted aluminum and melted glass. Soot from the initial blast and the subsequent fires had streaked down the gray hull, creating dark, tear-like stains that reached almost to the waterline. The air was finally clearing, the acrid chemical smell of the night replaced by the clean, cold salt spray of the open ocean. The executive officer, his uniform stained with ash and sweat, stood on the secondary bridge wing of the cruiser USS Port Royal, which had pulled within 50 meters of the Carney to facilitate a visual inspection. He looked across the narrow gap of churning white water at his ship. Despite the devastation above the main deck, the Carney rode steady in the swells, its hull cutting a clean path through the waves at 20 knots. The flag at the stern was frayed at the edges from the high-speed transit, but it flew straight and true in the morning breeze. The final report was compiled in the Combat Information Center over the next hour. The numbers were stark and written into the official record with heavy hearts. 7 personnel were confirmed killed in action, including the commanding officer and the officer of the deck. 14 others were listed as wounded, with 3 in critical condition aboard the hospital facilities of the USS Gerald R. Ford. The ship had expended 12 Tomahawk Land Attack Missiles and 42 rounds of 5-inch high-explosive ammunition. The strategic result was decisive. Satellite reconnaissance confirmed that the Iranian launch facility at Jask had been completely neutralized. The 3 mobile launchers, the command vehicle, and the HQ-9 radar site were nothing more than scorched craters and heaps of scrap metal. The 2 Iranian fast attack craft destroyed during the surface engagement had left no survivors, and the remaining 3 boats had been tracked returning to Bandar Abbas. In a state of disorganized retreat, the Iranian coastal defense network in that sector had been effectively blinded. Signal from the Secretary of Defense, the communications officer announced, handing a transcript to the executive officer. The president has been briefed. The actions of the crew of USS Carney are being cited as a testament to the highest traditions of the naval service. We are ordered to proceed to Naval Support Activity Bahrain for emergency repairs and a formal change of command ceremony. The engagement had lasted less than 4 hours, but it had altered the geopolitical landscape of the region. The United States had demonstrated that even a crippled destroyer possessed the lethal reach to strike back with overwhelming force within minutes of an unprovoked attack. The proportional response had been a clinical display of professional violence, designed to deter further escalation while exacting a severe price for the blood spilled on the Carney's bridge. As the sun rose higher, bleaching the sky, a pale, hard blue, the Carney and its escort ships turned toward the northwest. The crew began the long, exhausting process of cleaning the ship, scrubbing the soot from the bulkheads, stowing the fire hoses, and clearing the thousands of spent brass casings from the decks. There was no cheering, no celebration. There was only the quiet, disciplined work of sailors who had survived a nightmare and were now bringing their ship home. The wake of the destroyer stretched out behind it, a long, white road on the dark blue water. The silence on the ship was heavy, filled with the absence of the 7 men, who would not be standing on the pier in Bahrain. But as the engines hummed and the hull vibrated with purpose, the USS Carney proved that a warship is more than its steel and its systems. It is the spirit of the crew that remains when the bridge is gone and the lights go out.